Hi, and welcome to a new KSAT Money Q&A. I'm Ivan Herrera, and today I'm joined by Stephanie Scheller, the CEO of Disrupt, which produces professional business events. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me once again.
Ivan, I love being here. This is one of my favorite interviews every single time.
Thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking about how businesses can navigate through a rocky economy. Right now, businesses all over the country are seeing inflation, supply shortages, staffing shortages, and consumers are feeling that, those effects at the checkout. Now that you've worked with 5,000 plus businesses in the past decade, how do you think those issues are translating locally here?
Well, as you mentioned, we are seeing a lot of this nationally. So we're not immune to that, unfortunately. San Antonio has done an amazing job in navigating recessions and inflation and various issues over the past few years, but we're not immune to this. So of course, you're seeing small business owners who are struggling to get product in to have on the shelves. They're dealing with rising costs. They're having to pass that along. We're also dealing with a lot of frustration from buyers who are seeing those rising costs, but maybe aren't necessarily getting corresponding raises. And so there's this really challenging moment that happens where you have the rising costs, you have the small business owner who often has not raised the cost as much as they could have or should have because they were trying to protect their consumer, and the consumer is also frustrated as well. So what we're seeing is a lot of shorter tempers, a lot more lash out moments across the board. Obviously, small business owners are really hurting. They rarely have the room to negotiate better rates. They rarely want to pass on all of those increases to their clients. So it's created a very ugly situation across the board, I think.
Yeah, it seems a little tense, and what do you think businesses can do financially right now to avoid trailing behind and protect those profit margins if there were to be more economic fallout in the coming months?
I think that is an excellent question. And as always, that's where I try and focus people is, hey, we have to be proactive. Okay. So yes, learn from what's happened, but let's look forward just in case. And my job as a business owner and the business owners I work with is to make sure that my company is protected. So a few things that are really important. First would be knowing where the financials are at. And I think this is one area that a lot of small businesses struggle. A lot of big businesses, they have, a comptroller and a CFO, and they have a bookkeeping team, and they have all of these people to manage the numbers. A lot of small business owners are playing CEO and CFO and CMO and CXO, all of the O's. And so they tend to let some of these things slide. And I think right now, managing those finances is absolutely critical. Knowing that the financial statements are accurate. So if that means outsourcing it off that business owner's plate, so they are no longer the bookkeeper and they can pass it to someone else who has the time to make sure those statements are accurate, that's really important. But more important after that is going to be taking some of that time to review those statements, to check, well, where are my profit margins, gross profit and net profit? And if that's confusing, Google's your best friend. But that has to be where we start, is knowing those margins inside and out. I worked with a restaurant that literally built a spreadsheet so that every single week, as their numbers were coming in, so their vendors were bringing them, hamburger buns and meat and stuff like that, they would plug those rates into the spreadsheet and it would tell them whether or not they had moved outside of where the cost of goods sold needed to be, so that they could adjust those rates very, very much quicker, as opposed to 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 months down the road when they've been losing money on something for quite some time. So I think that's really important. And then the other area I would recommend, once you know your financials, is let's start looking at where you are spending money, and let's find some smart places to cut that money, the money that doesn't need to be spent, or renegotiate deals.
Definitely. And I love what you said about the business spreadsheet, because I love spreadsheets and I love just creating lists like that. So that's a really smart idea. And, you bring up a great point. Local businesses are relying a lot on vendors for their products, their services. And depending on that industry, some of those costs can be skyrocketing right now. How can businesses find and negotiate better vendors and pricing?
I'm going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, Ivan. But first and foremost, you have to know those numbers. So we have to be paying attention to your vendors' numbers and identify where, and this may be setting aside an hour a week just to evaluate vendor numbers, and not just your vendor numbers, but actively reaching out to other vendors to shop those rates consistently. Knowing once you establish maybe 3 or 4 vendors that you could shop through for rates, then it will also help them know that they have to stay competitive with the rates that they're offering you. So that will, it takes a little bit of setup to build relationships with these, find these vendors, build relationships, make sure they know that, hey, I'm going to ask you for a quote, and I'm going to ask Joe, and I'm going to ask Marie, all for quotes. But it really does help. It does take some time to sit there, and because you can't negotiate from a place of lack of knowledge. If you're going to negotiate with your vendors, you have to have knowledge on what you're asking for and what they can and can't do. So 1, start by knowing your numbers. 2, make sure you have a list of vendors. Take some time to research those vendors if you need to. And then, especially if you've got a vendor you really, really like working with and you want to renegotiate with this particular vendor, maybe you've got a long-term relationship with this vendor or whatever the reason is. At that point, ask them to sit down. And I think the best thing to do is actually ask them to sit down, like say, hey, I want to look at how we can set this up to be mutually beneficial so you and I can keep working together for the long haul. Can we sit down and talk about this? And set up a time where you're both going to come in, and then just ask them and say, okay, these are the things, start with, these are the things I love about working with you. Could you tell me what are some of the things we could do better to continue being a better client for you? These are going to be your negotiating points. Whatever they ask for, they say, well, honestly, if you could increase your ordering, or if you could do this, or you write that down. That's a great point. I would love to do. That's a great point. I'd love to do. Now you can sit down and say, okay, so these are the reasons I already gave you that I love working with you. These are the things I would love to be able to do for you. Can you give me this price break so that I can make this happen? Can you give me this? And it's got to be give and take. We can't just go in and be like, yo, give me better prices, unless you've got, a better price waiting. But you can go in and say, I'll do this for you if you'll do this, if you can help me out. And sometimes that conversation is all that's needed, but you have to make time to have that conversation.
Yeah, that's definitely smart. Just maintaining that line of communication with all the vendors. And switching gears, market share is really important for businesses trying to acquire more customers. And with the pandemic, a lot of businesses just struggled so much. With consumers right now having to second guess their spending habits, how do you think businesses can market to them and retain that market share?
This is a fabulous question and one of my favorites, because I believe that, yes, we need to be marketing more, especially as we're going into a pandemic. There will still be quite a bit of spending. And this is one of the things I've been trying to talk about a lot, is that spending will slow, but it won't stop. And it's going to be more important than ever that your business is positioned as the only place that they should be spending their money, because whereas when we're not in an inflation or in a recession, people may be willing to buy a couple versions of something, right? They might be more willing to toss money after something and just see if it works. Once we get into recession, once we get into a point where people are really feeling the pinch, they're going to take more time to research that you're the right option, you're the best option. And here's the cool part, they will typically be willing to spend a little more money for a better quality option. So they feel that they're going to be able to buy, the example that's always thrown out is one pair of boots and it lasts for 10 years versus having to buy a new pair of boots every year. They will, wherever possible, they will actually go they'll do more research and they'll buy the $300 pair of boots instead of the $100 pair of boots. So that is the shift that starts to happen. So how do we market to this? First and foremost, there has to be more marketing messages going out, because there is going to be a lot of clutter in the marketplace. There's going to be a lot of people trying to get your prospects' attention. So it's going to be important that we increase the number of social posts that are going out and emails that are going out and ads that are going out. And if you can afford billboards, like scaling back on those at this point is usually a bad idea. There's got to be more messages going out, but more than that, there has to be a really well built out process or funnel that you're pulling them into that's going to educate them on why you're the best option. And look, you shouldn't be the cheapest option. You're a small business, you provide better service, usually a better product. You probably shouldn't be the cheapest option out there. But you need to educate on why you are the best option out there. And that is going to be absolutely critical. More messages and a better process for educating the people who see the message and are interested in learning more.
Yeah, definitely. The research is the really, really, really important when it comes to marketing, because if you don't know your consumer, you're not doing it well. Thank you for sharing all those talking points. Do you have any final words of encouragement or any final advice for businesses that may be going through some of these struggles right now that we discussed?
Yeah, I think my biggest piece of advice and my business piece of encouragement is just to remember there is still spending happening. It doesn't matter what we go through, there's going to be spending happening. And being proactive to recognize, hey, we may be heading into this squeeze. Like now's the time to start paying attention to where I'm spending, taking some time to negotiate with my vendors to try and keep prices down, to position myself competitively, knowing my margins, and then making sure that, yeah, I'm continuing to push marketing out, but doing it in a smart way that pulls them into a funnel of education that convinces them to buy from me. Those are going to be like, the people who do that will come out of this stronger and bigger. They will grow through this. There's absolutely that potential. It's just going to take a little extra work for the next year or so as the economy starts to hopefully sort itself out.
Thank you again for sharing all those talking points. Where can people go to find more of your work and any contact information?
Yeah, so the easiest place to find us is going to be our website. That is www.growdisrupt.com. Like, let's grow your business in a new and disruptive and cool and exciting way. That's, you'll find info about our events. There's a whole ton of education on the website. There's links there to my personal website, so you can see all kinds of articles and education on how to market your business. We always talk about, it's possible to market like $1 billion business on a small business budget, and all that information on the website.
Awesome. Stephanie Scheller with Grow Disrupt. Thank you so much for joining me on this KSAT Money Q&A. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for having me.